We're watching, we're telling, trustdale.com.
For 30 years, his reporting has protected you from scams, and his investigations have saved taxpayers millions. Today, he's on the radio fighting for you, confronting the bad guys, and getting solutions to your toughest consumer problems. Trust Dale Radio is on the air. Here's your consumer problem solver, Dale Cardwell.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you're in North Texas or you're in Tennessee and you're Florida, you're in Alabama or Georgia or anywhere along the iHeart Radio network listening in, thank you for spending your time with us. We appreciate it. Buddy Wofford, how are you today?
Man, we're on the grassy side. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. So if you've never listened to Trust Dale Radio, we're about three things. We want to help you make smart purchases. We want to give you informed reasons to get the right contractor, the right professional to provide services. Number two, we want to mediate problems. If you're sideways with a company and you just can't get the result that you believed you deserve, then get us involved. We mediate every day, and we really, really work on solving problems. And then thirdly, we go after the guys that deserve getting got. And that basically means that if you've been burned and you can prove you've been burned, you share your information with me, and then I see that you've been burned intentionally, then that's when we go hold folks accountable.
We like that.
They don't expect it, buddy,
I
because
know.
they live in a world where there's no such thing as
Consumer police.
That's right. So we provide consumer policing.
Yes, we do.
To bad companies who are trying to burn you. So those three things are what we focus on. Trust Dale Radio brought to you by Madaris Siding and Windows. Folks, lots of contractors out there can do the job at your home. The catch is lots of them will come to your home, and it will take forever to get all of your different home improvement schemes accomplished. So you can do that.
You can do schemes, yes.
Yeah, or you can call one company.
Or projects.
Madaris Siding and Windows, they're pros at everything under your roof. And if you choose them through my website, you'll get the Make It Right guarantee. Also by Haviland Express Lube. Those guys are experts at changing your oil efficiently for a fair upfront price, and they are experts at customer service. And when you stop in, tell them you want the Trustdale deal. Buddy, fascinating subject.
I know. This is one of those that I find very unique because we actually have someone who's trying to avoid doing their job.
Yeah.
And I love that.
That's a very, very rare situation.
I love that.
Deciding to dissolve a marriage can be a painful one to make. Oftentimes, folks get caught up in the emotions surrounding separation, and it can be really difficult to make good consumer or legal decisions. However, just like with any big decision, the more information you have, the smarter choices you can make. And with us now in studio to discuss divorce, Lee Meriwether of Meriwether Tharp. Lee, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It is our pleasure. I was telling Buddy, we were talking just before the show came on, that this is like the most fascinating subject that we could ever talk about.
And we were talking earlier, and it's so rewarding literally to see a firm that really would rather not do what they do best. And their work revolves around not having to get a divorce. I mean, that's wonderful.
It's really interesting. It's an interesting approach to the issue, because what we want to do are save marriages,
Right.
and what we want to do are keep families together. And sometimes it's simply not possible. And Lee, you and Bob and your team, I love that approach, because your entire marketing position is, folks, let's first see if this is broken.
That's right.
You know, and so there's plenty of people that are going to wind up needing to dissolve their marriage. But why not make certain first that
Right.
it's the path you need to go?
Isn't that wonderful?
It is. How did y'all come to that decision to approach it that way?
I don't think it was a matter of us coming to that decision so much as that's just the way we live our life. And I'm talking, it's a philosophy of the partners of the firm. I personally am very involved in trying to save marriages. My wife and I are involved in a marriage groups through our church. And at one point, we were doing a podcast called Healthy Married Life, and I'm not trying to promote that because we've been so busy, I haven't been able to keep up with it. But I mean, we are very involved with just the ministry of trying to save marriages.
You know, it's really funny, and I have great respect for what you do, but I have an interesting analogy. I represent a company called Clark & Washington, and they are bankruptcy specialists. And what I recognize is that Congress gives Americans the right to pursue that option in the event it's a last resort.
Right.
So Clark & Washington, they get so many clients simply because they're going to be honest and say, hey, guess what? This is not really the option you should pursue.
Mm-hmm.
That honesty makes people trust them.
It does.
And I think you guys have the same approach. You're like, I'm going to go in there, and these people aren't going to try to talk me into doing this.
That's right.
I love that. So what should someone do if they are struggling with a divorce decision, Lee?
Well, I'm going to cover a number of issues, and if I talk too much, we lawyers would like to talk too much sometimes. Just cut me off. But because I get passionate about all of this, every aspect of it, from saving the marriages to walking them through the divorce process, if that's what they choose, so that it doesn't have to be nasty. That's what we try to do, because the cool thing about marriage groups is that I get to see firsthand the consequences of bad divorces from these people because I have a lot of young couples in my marriage and the Thrive groups that we do, and you can hear the pain that they went through as children, how it's impacting their current marriage. So we try to kind of pull that as much as we can out of the divorce process. So I'll just give a little background there.
Sure.
And speaking of children, that's the first thing that we like to remind people, that when there's children involved, the divorce does not end the relationship between the parents.
Yep.
Because that relationship continues as long as those children are alive. So for their sake, and for the fact that if you were thinking that if I just get a divorce, it's going to avoid my problems with my spouse, it may not. So it's important to work on you first. And so you take a moment to focus on ask yourself, where might I have done, what could I have done different in this marriage? What was my role in getting us to where we are today? A lot of people want to blame their spouse, and they don't take a moment to look introspectively and say, how could I have done better? And in that respect, one of the ways to do that is pick up marriage books. I mean, one of my favorite ones is it okay if I mention the names of books?
Sure.
Okay. Is The 5 Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. And the reason I love that book, and I'll tell you, let me go through my points, and I want to come back to that because I don't want to miss an important point. So reading books is very well an excellent way to maybe identify some problems you're having. Another way is marriage counseling. Sometimes the couples just don't get along as far as communicating about finances, and it creates arguments. Well, I mean, there's, and I know on 640, there's Dave Ramsey. His Financial Peace University is fantastic. That's just one example. But it doesn't have to be per se marriage counseling. It could be sort of financial counseling. That's another thing to do. They have these things called marriage intensives. And there's all different options out there, but if they could Google marriage intensive, and it's usually a weekend intensive seminar where you get one-on-one for 12 hours a day, 3 days straight, with some counselors, and some are faith-based, some are secular-based. I know the Catholic Church has its own version of that, and I apologize for not remembering the name off the top of my head. But there's an opportunity to really get intensive with your relationship to see if it's salvageable. And the last thing is surrounding yourself with wise counsel. And I do want to come back to that because that's going to impact probably most of what we talk about today, picking wise counsel through the divorce process.
Okay, so I'm just exploding with questions.
Okay.
Do you ever counsel folks and you're sitting there and you can tell that there's one spouse that's way over the deep end in being self-involved, self-absorbed, and you see, gosh, this is really tough because he doesn't get how self-absorbed he is?
Oh, yes. I see that a lot. And it's usually difficult for that when I'm talking to the person on the phone and I can hear that they're self-absorbed, to talk to them about working on themselves first. And it's difficult, but one of the things you can do with that is sometimes what they need to understand, they can never change their spouse.
Yeah.
The only person they can change in the relationship is them.
So that really is important to accept and understand that.
It is.
I never thought of that, Lee. That never crossed my mind. The biggest problem in my marriage right now, buddy, is that my wife refuses to housebreak the dog.
Yeah, but you're right there with her. I mean, you love that little dog.
I do,
I
do, but it doo-doos too much. Okay? So, but
if that's the worst problem you ever have, you're going to be in great shape.
I didn't say the worst
Isn't that
problem
right,
I've
Lee?
ever had.
Yeah.
Okay, our expert today, Lee Meriwether, he's going to spend the entire show with us. So we're going to do our best to ask the questions that you would love to have the answers to. Of course, Lee Meriwether is a partner of Meriwether and Tharp with offices all over the metro area. And if you want to check them out, visit their page at trustdale.com. We'll be right back.
fighting for you and finding solutions. This is Trust Dale Radio. Your consumer investigator, Dale Cardwell.
Alfie,
I love
you're
it.
not old enough to know that song.
I thought it was going to the chapel.
Oh, that's a heartbreaker.
That's a
there.
heartbreaker.
Oh, I'm old enough to remember when Tammy Wynette and George Jones split up, and it
Yeah.
broke everybody's heart.
They couldn't believe it.
I mean, how could you leave the possum?
Yeah, there you go.
Our expert today, Lee Meriwether of Meriwether and Tharp, divorce attorneys, but they're the guys that also want to explore every option of keeping your family together. And Lee, you were wanting to share a story before the break. Go ahead.
Yeah, so going back to your question about, well, if they feel like someone else is self-absorbed, why should they work on themselves first? And it goes back to the 5 love languages. Let me give you an example. And what made me love this book was I had a guy walk into my office years ago practically in tears. Actually, he was in tears, and he'd just been served with divorce paperwork, and it was blown away. He didn't understand what was going on. He thought the marriage was great. But when you talk to her about it, she said that this was a loveless marriage for the last 5 years, and she has been miserable.
Wow.
And you sit there going, how can you have 2 different perspectives of the same marriage? Well, in the 5 love languages, and I know this is an expose about that book, but I'm trying to give this example. If she had read this book, she would have realized that there's sort of 5 core love languages according to Dr. Chapman, and one of them is what's called acts of service, and another one is of quality time. Okay, in this situation, he worked all day, came home, pretty much gave her the paycheck, let her do whatever she wanted with the money. She always had a fresh meal on the table, hot meal on the table, took care of the kids, make sure his laundry was always done. So from his perspective, the marriage was great.
Yeah.
He was serving her by handing her his paycheck and working all day for her, and she was serving him by food. And then he would sit down on the couch, watch TV, and just about every weekend would play golf with his buddies because he thought things were great.
Yeah.
Well, her love language was acts of service. I'm sorry, quality time. So from her perspective, he didn't love her because after dinner, rather than talking to her, he'd sit on the couch, and every weekend he was off with his buddies. So from her perspective, he was totally self-absorbed and was just selfish, and that's why they were getting a divorce. But if she had taken the time to read the book, she might have realized, oh my gosh, he doesn't realize what's really going on here,
That's
and
right.
could have had a conversation and may have saved that marriage.
So how do you get someone to see themselves in a different light when they can't before they meet you?
Well, let's talk about counseling. Let's say they're trying to get somebody to counseling, because one of the big problems is I see it a lot of times with men. They're like, I don't need counseling, or they'll say something like, well, I'm not the problem, you're the problem. Why don't you go to counseling? And I see that a lot because I'll ask if the women callers I get in, and they will say they've tried counseling, they can't get them to go. And my usual response is, what works a lot of times is, okay, so if I'm the problem and I go to counseling and I'm not really sure what my problem is, shouldn't you be there with me so you can tell the counselor what's wrong with me? And that usually works. You're like, oh, yeah, I don't want you to.
That would get Angie to show up.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. You better book 2 hours.
Yeah, without a doubt. Fascinating. So, Lee, let's move to the next segment, or the next step, getting
Okay.
ready for the divorce. The person's made the decision to proceed forward with the divorce. What should they do to get ready?
All right. Well, there's 4 core things that I think they should do to get ready, and one is begin with the end in mind. So they've made a decision, I'm getting a divorce, or someone else made that decision for them. They just got served with papers. They begin with the end in mind. What is my life going to look like after my spouse is out of the picture? And then start working backwards. So let me give you 2 examples. So I had a case with a father who wanted primary physical custody, but he traveled a lot, okay? And he was actually on the other side. And they were making allegations that my client had some mental issues and she shouldn't be with the kids. And so at court, he did not begin with the end in mind. And at court, I asked him at a temporary hearing, well, sir, you travel most of the time. What are you going to do when you're out of town? Where are the kids going to be? And it was like,
Yeah.
So, of course, he didn't get custody, but he did not begin with the end in mind. He didn't begin, like, come into court. Like, if I had been representing that dad, I would have told him, you need to come in with a plan. You need to say, I've got these nannies set up, or not paramours. I've got these nannies set up, and they're going to take care of the kids when they're not around. And because you do have situations where a parent is suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse, but you got to come to court with the end in mind.
And you've got to have an attorney that prepares you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Not do it yourself and I'll see you next Tuesday. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so buddy, when you have your own radio show, you get to ask any question you want.
I know, isn't that great?
Fun?
I love
that. So here's the thing. I cannot imagine the practice of law where you are present in a more incredibly emotional and potentially hostile environment. How do you do that?
Well, people that ask me that every day, I think it's just because we care. I mean, I know that sounds corny, but if I didn't care, I couldn't do it. And I guess the funny thing is one of the biggest struggles I have is clients not listening to me. I'll give them advice and they won't listen and they'll run off, do whatever they want. And then they come back later and say, I should have listened to you. So I think I struggle with that.
Well, here's another thing that's a gift. It's a gift from God, in my view, for you. You're the kind of guy that's really hard not to like. We have a guy that works with us. His name's Jamie Dempsey. And, buddy, the first time you and I met him,
We just liked him.
He's just one of those guys that
likable
it's
guys.
almost impossible to not like this guy. And
Right.
so you've got a sincerity about you, Lee, that I could see, and I'm sure the other side can get very upset with you because I'm sure you have to be tough when you have to be tough. But you exude this, look, I'm not in this to try to harm you. I'm not in this to try to get you. I'm doing this to try to resolve this in the most amicable way possible.
That's right.
That's what you seem to exude. So congratulations on that.
Well, there was three other things real quickly. Just make sure you get your finances in order, and that figure out what your monthly budget is, figure out what all the bills are that you've got to deal with, and figure out what are your assets and your liabilities. So that's one of the other things to get ready. Collecting documents, that's the third thing, collecting documents surrounding that. And the fourth thing is, really surrounding yourself with wise counsel, a really good support group.
Yeah, I can see that. Are your family members wise counsel, or are they not?
No, and let me tell you why. Because especially going back to they can be, but I usually say no, because let's say in the early stages you're really considering this and you go to a family member and you tell them all the bad things that you're dealing with. Well, sometimes you'll wind up forgiving your spouse and your family members won't. And so it creates a difficult situation. So one of the things I say when you're looking for wise counsel is look for people that are outside of the situation, that are also have nothing to lose by telling you the truth. So, and I can't claim that great wisdom. That I got that from Andy Stanley. So he's a smarter man than I am. But don't be afraid. You want someone that has nothing to lose by telling you the truth. So, and sometimes family members, they may be afraid to hurt your feelings, and that's going to create a problem.
And I also, this is my dime store psychology, and you can correct me, Lee, after I spit it out, but I don't think it's a good idea to tell your in-laws how horrible your spouse is.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, they are the parent of that child. And
right.
so if you hope to restore the marriage, they're going to remember what you said about their baby,
yes.
right?
Yep.
So that's probably not the wise counsel you want to seek.
No.
And I'm going to give a dime's worth too here. Don't get advice. Don't look to your office friends or friends for advice on divorce or marriage. I mean, because they all have a different perspective. Go to the professionals.
Yeah. Okay. So before we run out of time before this break, Lee, how do you find a lawyer?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. There's different ways to look at it. One of the ways is one of the wonderful things actually about the internet, and the most dangerous, is that there's all kinds of review sites out there, and they like Kudzu, that's a traditional one. There's the other one that I think they're doing marketing. Avo is another one, and that's where clients can go. Former clients can go post reviews about lawyers and that sort of thing. But obviously, you need to be wise in your selecting process, because some of them will also give lawyers ratings, like this lawyer's a 7.0 and this lawyer's a 10, and some of these are really based on algorithms, software algorithms. So you want to temper that rating by what other people are saying about that lawyer when you read about them online. But that shouldn't be your sole decision making. The other thing you should do, and one of the most well, we're almost finished, but the two other things are make sure they know your local judges. And the last thing is make sure you feel comfortable with your lawyer, because at some point they will have to tell you something you don't want to hear. And if you're not comfortable with your lawyer, you may make a bad decision.
Lee, I have seen in person the former of what you just said. Make sure that your attorney knows the local judges and knows there's courts and their clerks and all that, because I've seen, you talk about a home-cooked situation. I had a lady in my conventional reporting days who was just getting slammed in court, and it was because her husband and his attorney was very, very knowledgeable about that court system.
Right.
And I was stunned at how incredibly unfair it seemed to be. And the poor lady just made a big mistake by bringing in a non-local attorney. We're on with Lee Meriwether. We'll be right back.
Scam artists don't want you to listen. You're tuned in to Trust Dale Radio. Here's your consumer investigator, Dale Cardwell.
Today we're talking about perhaps the most painful but most interesting subject that we can talk about.
Exactly.
When you decide that it's time to end your marriage, how do you know it's time to end your marriage? And once you have decided that, what are the steps to take that are appropriate? And hopefully, Lee Meriwether, our expert today, hopefully the end result is that it just causes the least pain possible.
That's right.
That's the goal?
That's the goal.
So you wanted to make a point before we went to break.
Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on something you said, because I didn't want you said it correctly, but I want your listeners to take the wrong meaning from it.
Okay.
You had mentioned how the local lawyer understood the system, but some people interpret that to mean they may have been doing backdoor deals with the judge, and
Yeah,
that's
not
not what
what
you
I
said.
intended,
But
right.
I want to be clear with people, because it is important. Why it's important is these judges, they have a hard job. They have perfect strangers walk into their room, and they have to have 20 years of their lives compressed into a few hours and then make a decision about the rest of their lives and the children. So it is a very difficult decision for them. And the lawyers that understand the judges, they understand what they like to hear and how they like the cases presented. So you could walk into a courtroom and think that someone got home cooked, and it's not. That home cooking sort of implies has a negative connotation.
Yeah, something's going on that doesn't meet the eye.
Right.
That's not what's happening. What's happening is that those attorneys that know the system know the judge's hot buttons.
Exactly.
They know what he or she doesn't want to hear.
Yep.
I get it completely.
So, and you didn't say it wrong. I know how people misinterpret that, because I get the calls about it all the time.
Yes.
And then one of the other things was about hiring a lawyer. There's this myth out there that the bulldog is the one that's going to get you the great results, and it's been my experience that the only thing the bulldog gets is a huge attorney fee bill. And there are times, most of the time when you're going through divorce, it's nice but firm. You can be nice in saying no. You don't have to, do a scorched earth policy, especially if there's children involved.
I think back when I was younger, an iconic movie that captured this angst, I thought, was Kramer versus Kramer. I don't know if people still talk about that the way they did back in the 80s and 90s, but the moment where Dustin Hoffman's character sits down with the attorney and says, no matter what, I want custody. And I want at least co-custody, if not total custody. And the attorney says, it's almost impossible for you to win. It's going to cost you a fortune, and it's not a path that I recommend. And, and Dustin Hoffman, well, guess what? It's the first time he ever got divorced. He's going to do it his way.
Right.
And so that was probably a good example of somebody not listening to their attorney.
Yes.
So let's go into this, Lee. How do I keep my divorce from bankrupting me?
Well, the first thing I say is hire a lawyer. And that may sound like, well, wait a minute, lawyers cost money. We just talked about bulldogs. But I quite literally last week had a guy walk into my office and said, well, I'm going to save some money and not hire a lawyer to look at my settlement proposal. And he signed a settlement proposal that cost him $1.2 million in non-bankruptable alimony payments over the next 18 years.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
And if he had come into us, there would have been no way he would have paid that much. No way. And I had another one who was thinking about doing a prenuptial agreement and did it himself, didn't want to hire a lawyer. And he had a clause in there that was read kind of funny, and the opposing attorney did his job and tried to argue that it was basically $400,000 of non-modifiable alimony, and the guy didn't have that to pay it. And that clause, we litigated that clause to the Supreme Court, and it cost him. It was the Supreme Court of Georgia. It cost him $30,000 just arguing over that one clause. So
oh my gosh!
one of the first things to do is hire a lawyer. I mean, and make sure, like I said, you don't need to hire a bulldog. Just hire someone who's going to help guide you through the process. And
it's something you just said is so important that I've learned is that contracts are not necessarily written for lay people to understand them.
Yes.
And so what you think a contract says may not be what the legal system sees it. That's
Right.
why you need an attorney.
Yes.
Because I've seen that happen over and over again, and my bacon has been saved a few times, Lee, by attorneys that I work with saying, no, I know what your intent is, and that's not going to cover you
Right.
in the event something goes wrong. And I've had to learn to let go of the reins and let the experts write the agreements.
Right.
So
Right.
that's a tough one. Who pays for my divorce if I wasn't the one who asked for it?
Well, that and that is a very sticky question. Can be very dependent on the state you're in. Because I know I'm licensed in Georgia and Florida. We have lawyers on our office licensed all over the place. But so I'm speaking from Georgia and a Florida perspective. Just because someone files for divorce doesn't mean they're going to have to pay your attorney's fees. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to be aware of, and talk to your lawyer about the situation. For an example, and I know most states have this, but in Georgia there's a specific code section that, let's say you've got the breadwinner, and I'll use the man in this case, and he makes $200,000 a year, and his wife's always been a stay-at-home mom. She can petition the court for him to pay her attorney's fees along the way. So there is in Georgia, and I believe Florida has a similar rule, that there is ability to get access to resources to have an attorney on both sides. They want an even playing field.
Does that work in reverse as well? Would the husband, if the wife is the one seeking the divorce, could the husband petition the court for the wife to
If
pay the
she
bill?
was making most of the money, yes. It's basically, they're not looking at fault at that point. They're looking at means. Who has the better means to pay?
Okay, and so this is one of those times when I say the person who represents himself has a fool for an attorney.
That's right.
It's
And
what
so-
he says about flying, too.
I do. I say that a lot. The person who serves as their own financial advisor has a
And
fool for a
financial.
pilot.
That's right.
And so the thing is, you need someone to act on your behalf. And what I do with financial planning is I say, look, you need someone who cannot be influenced by an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody. I love what you said about Andy Stanley, that you need advice from someone who does not have a stake in telling you the truth.
Right.
That it doesn't harm them if they told you one thing or the other.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very important.
And following up on that, the second thing, one of the to keep your costs down, is listen to your lawyer, because often, I tell people all the time that you've got two choices here. We can settle here and pay your spouse $10,000 extra you don't want to pay her, or we can go to court and you can pay me $20,000. That doesn't make sense. Why don't you just give her the $20,000 and let's be done with it? So, that's how we practice. And there's I would say most family law attorneys will take that approach as well.
When you can keep it civil, when you can convince your client, and perhaps with the other counsel, if everybody agrees in the room, they're not trying to get you. I'm not trying to get her. We're simply seeking a way to do this with the least pain possible. Is that when you know that that's going to work out?
Yes.
Is there a moment you feel that?
Yes, and I will tell you that some people will get nervous, like, oh gosh, this attorney, they're great attorneys on the other side, I'm really nervous. And most of the time I'm like, no, this is great. They know the judges, they know what the odds are if we went to court on these facts, how this would come out, and they're going to sit down and we're going to resolve this case. So good lawyers, good family law lawyers know how to resolve cases.
Okay, so your team, you and Bob, if you guys take a case and then you find out who the other side is, are there times you say, okay, that's awesome, we're really happy that's who they retained?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. And sometimes we'll pick up the phone and we'll call them and say, hey, I'm so glad you're on the case. Here's our issues. Here's what my client's telling me. What's your client telling you? And we try to sift through the story to find out what's really going on. because each party, spouse, is telling their story from their perspective. And, often, I'm sure you've heard, and when you're in litigation, there's 4 stories. His story, her story, the truth, and then the only one that matters, what the judge thinks is the truth.
Yes. Yeah, I've never heard that before. I've heard that
there were
there's
3.
There's 3 perspectives in an auto accident. Your perspective, the other person's perspective, and then the 10 people that observed it. I guess there's actually 12 perspectives. Fascinating subject. Our guest today is Lee Meriwether of Meriwether and Tharp, and Lee, you guys practice in Florida, so our listeners in Florida, you can check out trustdale.com and find Meriwether and Tharp, obviously in Georgia, and there's people all over the country that need advice, and that's one thing that you guys are really good at, is taking time to share your expertise with people and helping them through this very, very difficult time in their life. So check out Meriwether and Tharp at trustdale.com and know that your customer service experience is backed by my Make It Right guarantee. These people are going to treat you with respect. They're going to be prompt in communicating with you, and the thing I love, buddy, they have your best interest at heart.
Always. Love
We'll be
that.
right back.
Now, taking your calls and confronting the bad guys. Trust Dale Radio. Here's your consumer investigator, Dale Cardwell.
So we're talking about divorce today.
Or not.
Yeah, or not. And how do you reach the decision of whether it's going to happen or not? And what is the process? Our expert today, Lee Meriwether of Meriwether and Tharp. And check out their website. And Lee, how do people find you? Obviously, Trust Dale, but how do other people find your firm?
Our primary website is mtlawoffice.com. M as in Mary, T as in Tom. mtlawoffice.com.
And we were talking during the break about other resources, and if you don't mind sharing, how you have a blog and you have another website that's basically a counseling website?
Well, I have a personal website that's healthymarriedlife.com. And it's got some resources on there as a podcast, and that's the one I've been so busy that my wife and I haven't been able to keep it up. We're hoping to get back to it by the end of the year, get it going again. But I think there's like 9 episodes on there. But the stuff about picking a wise counsel, one of the episodes is all about picking wise counsel. So some of the points that I've talked about, they can go to that website and search for it.
And, buddy, something you mentioned about talking to people in your office complex and how you probably shouldn't. I've learned, as I've matured, that when I have an issue with trustdale.com, there are people in the office I really don't need to talk about that issue with.
Right.
Now, it might make me feel better if I do. But what I do is I try to say, okay, who's the colleague that has the most expertise in this area to solve this challenge? And so, because it really doesn't do you any good to go through the office and tell everybody in your office, hey, I'm getting a divorce, he's a rat, whatever.
Well, that's personal stuff. You just don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that one of the big things we've seen in our cases is someone's having difficulty in their marriage. They confide in a worker of the opposite sex. And all of a sudden they start showing, oh, that's just terrible. That just sounds horrible. And the next thing you know, they don't intend it that way. I mean, the conversation starts for real reasons, but then it eventually, either turns into an affair or creates a situation where the spouse doesn't trust that person anymore, and then you get into a divorce.
Wow.
So always avoid someone of the opposite sex, especially at work, but anywhere.
Right.
It just creates too many opportunities to create doubt in the relationship.
And that's excellent advice. And Lee, people go down that path, and it's a slippery slope.
It
and
is.
Human nature is so powerful. So the divorce process, if someone had to go through a divorce, Lee, can you explain for our listeners what that process looks like in general?
Yeah. So now I know you've got a multi-state audience, so I'm going to speak in general terms. Every state has its own unique laws concerning the process, but in general, divorces follow a path. There's a complaint that's filed that starts the process. There's an answer that the person who receives the complaint files. And then there's what's called discovery, and that's where the lawyers ask for financial information. And if there's a contested custody, they ask questions of the other party. Why do you think you should be the primary? What's wrong with my client? I'm overgeneralizing. But so you exchange information. Okay, and then the case can take different paths from there. Some courts allow what's called temporary hearings, where the court will hear things on a temporary basis, and they'll decide during the pendency of this divorce, until all the issues are resolved, this is where the kids are going to stay, when. This is who's going to pay what bills and who's going to pay child support. So depending on the nature of the case and the county, even in Georgia, there's different counties with different ways they handle temporary hearings.
If you don't want a divorce, and either because you're mean-spirited and you don't want to cooperate, or if you're in love and want to save your relationship, can you slow it down legally?
Well, okay, that's a dangerous place to be because some people don't want to get engaged. They say, well, if I ignore the process, then I'm going to be okay. And that's the worst thing you can do. You can't ignore the process.
Yeah.
You've got to stay engaged. If there are discovery questions that are asked, you got to answer those questions. Now, you can be as nice as possible. You can keep asking to go to counseling to work on it. That's where you work on you first to see if you can convince the other person. Again, you can't change them, but you may change you so that they want to stay married to you. So you focus on you during the process, but listen to your lawyer. You cannot disengage during this process because you ultimately will you could get a horrible result at the end.
Yeah. What does it mean if someone files a contested divorce?
Okay, so in most states, that just means that you didn't have a settlement agreement when you filed.
Okay.
That's all that means. If you file with a settlement agreement, it's quote uncontested. If you file it without one, it's contested. It doesn't mean you've got to try your case. In fact, that's what I was going to talk about. The next step after the discovery or temporary hearing is potentially mediation. Or just different alternative dispute resolutions is what the common term is, but mediation is one of those options where you get both lawyers, the clients, and a third-party neutral mediator, and you get them all in the same building. They don't necessarily have to be in the same room, but they get in the same building. And the mediator goes back and forth with offers, and their sole goal is not to judge your case, not to say who wins or loses, but to allow communication to reach a settlement. And that's one of the best ways to resolve a marriage. You don't have to get in that courtroom and point fingers at each other. It's just a very effective means of settling a case.
And then I've seen divorces where one spouse or the other uses filings and discovery to embarrass the other side. And it seems really, really mean-spirited, but I suppose there could be some purpose in it to try to get leverage in a dispute over assets or something. Is that fairly common?
It happens from time to time, and unfortunately, the cases where I've seen that happen, the spouse just gets upset and does things in an open record, because when you file for divorce in states, that's public record. Anybody can go look at it. So someone wants to embarrass somebody on the record. Well, that can have negative consequences. If you report that your husband was behaving a certain way and your husband's the breadwinner and then they get fired as a result, you've just hurt yourself.
Right.
So it's critical before you do anything where you go public, whether it be Facebook. I mean, social media creates all kinds of problems in divorces. You need to consult with your lawyer and decide, is that the wise thing to do?
You know, it's funny. Part of our service, Buddy, is we're about to launch in a very big way a real estate and relocation service.
That's
you can
right.
already go to Trustell and get those services, but we're about to put it on the highway.
That's right.
And one of our real estate agents, Lee, specializes in crisis real estate.
Oh, okay.
Because he realized that people, when they go through divorce and it's time to buy or sell the house, sometimes people hang on to the house for emotional reasons when they really don't need to hang on to the house.
Right.
And he said, and he felt he was called into that area of real estate business because he said nobody focuses on how to help people at that situation. I thought that's really cool that he feels as though that's what he wants to do. How long does this take to get a divorce?
Well, I was actually talking to someone this morning about that. So it really depends on how much the two of you can agree to. The more things you can agree on, the quicker the case takes. The fewer things you can agree on, the longer the case can take. And it also depends on the state you're in, the county you're in. I've seen one type of case in one county take a year, another one take 3 years.
Okay, can I do a lightning round with you?
Yes.
What's
go.
a quickie divorce?
What's a quickie divorce?
People get on a plane and go somewhere else and get divorced in 24 or 48 hours. I see that on TV. Is that real?
I don't know if you can do that in Nevada. you may be able to do it there. In Georgia, you can't get divorced quicker than 31 days if there's a settlement agreement.
Got it. Good answer. Okay, next question is, what's the longest period of time you've seen a divorce take?
4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and by the way, in that one, they were only married 3.
Oh, no.
They did not celebrate those anniversaries, buddy.
No, they did not.
Okay, and last question, the time we have to get in. So what's the average time of a divorce proceeding?
If they can work it out, I would say 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the more they work out, we have a lot of cases that are just a few months because they work it out pretty quickly.
Will you come back?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, because I've got one more question.
Okay.
Have you seen some saved right before the final?
Yes.
That's good.
I saved one while we were mediating, and he dismissed, and I ran into him in Home Depot a few months ago, and he came up and gave me a huge hug, and they're happier than they've ever been.
That is awesome. What a great story to end the show
Oh, we got
on.
4 more kids.
Okay, you can find Meriwether and Tharp at trustdale.com. If you truly want someone that cares about you and cares about your spouse and a positive outcome, they're your guys. We'll see you next time.